held Rex close, feeling his warmth one last time, my heart heavy with the impending farewell. His eyes, once bright and full of life, had dulled with age and illness, yet they still held that familiar trust. 12 years of loyalty, companionship, and unconditional love had led to this difficult moment. The vet was ready with the syringe, and I was trying to hold myself together, knowing I'd soon have to say goodbye to my best friend. But as the vet approached, his expression suddenly changed. He hesitated, staring at Rex with a look of confusion. "This is odd," he murmured, almost to himself. For a moment, my sorrow was interrupted by a wave of uncertainty. What could possibly be odd at a moment like this? "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely steady. The vet didn't respond right away. Instead, he quickly checked Rex's medical records, flipping through the pages with a focused intensity. The room, which had been filled with a quiet, somber mood, now buzzed with an unspoken tension. But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming stories. I watched as the vet scanned the records, occasionally glancing back at Rex. My mind raced. What could have caused him to pause like that? I had prepared myself for the worst, yet here I was, confronted with something unexpected. After a few moments, he looked up, his face still marked by confusion. "I need to ask a few questions," he said carefully. "Have you noticed any changes in Rex's behavior recently? Has he been eating differently or acting unusually?" His tone was urgent, almost as if he was grasping at straws. I explained how Rex had been slowing down over the past few months, eating less and growing weaker despite our numerous vet visits. Each visit had ended with the same grim outlook. There was no getting better, only a gradual decline. But here we were, and the vet was acting like he had missed something. He continued to ask more questions, each one more specific than the last. Has he been more sensitive to sounds? Struggling to walk? Favoring one side? I answered as best as I could, confused by the sudden barrage of questions. He listened intently, his brow furrowed, before excusing himself to speak with a colleague. I looked down at Rex, his tired eyes still fixed on me. He was calm, as if unaware of the emotional storm swirling around us. I had been preparing to let him go, to end his suffering, and now everything seemed uncertain. I could hear the vet and his assistant speaking quietly across the room, their voices low but serious. A few minutes later, the vet returned, this time holding a small device. "I'd like to run a quick scan," he said. "We need to check something." I agreed, even though I had no idea what they were looking for. The scan was brief, and as they reviewed the results, I searched their faces for some sign, some clue as to what was happening. The vet then stepped out to make a phone call. I turned to the assistant, desperate for answers. "What's going on?" I asked. She smiled gently, but her eyes were guarded. "We're just being thorough," she said. "There are a few things that don't quite add up, and we want to make sure we're not missing anything." Those words did little to calm my anxiety. I had spent the past months watching Rex's health decline, preparing myself for this painful goodbye. We had tried everything to help him, but nothing had worked. Now, just as I was bracing myself to say goodbye, I found myself pulled into an inexplicable situation, a glimmer of hope mixed with fear. The vet came back, accompanied by a specialist named Dr. Weber. She introduced herself with a warm smile, though her eyes showed concern. "I've been briefed on Rex's situation," she said, taking a seat across from me, "and I have to admit his case is quite unusual." There was that word again, unusual. It sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dr. Weber explained that some of Rex's recent test results didn't align with the symptoms he had been showing. "The data suggests two conflicting things," she said. "On one hand, we see signs of a progressive decline, consistent with what you've described. But on the other, there are markers indicating his body is trying to heal, almost like a spontaneous recovery." I was stunned. Rex hadn't shown any signs of improvement. If anything, he was slipping away. "Is that even possible?" I asked. Dr. Weber nodded slowly. "It's rare, but not unheard of. Sometimes the body can exhibit strange responses when there's an underlying condition that hasn't been properly identified. We need to investigate further." The rest of that day felt surreal. What was supposed to be a solemn goodbye had transformed into a whirlwind of medical tests and consultations. I watched as Dr. Weber and the vet reviewed Rex's scans, checking and rechecking the data. I could hear terms like autoimmune disorder, endocrine imbalance, and anomalous recovery thrown around, and none of it made sense to me. Dr. Weber asked if there was anything in Rex's history that might explain this. I tried to remember every visit, every treatment. Then it struck me years ago, Rex had an anomaly in his blood work, something the vet at the time had dismissed as minor. "There was this one thing," I said, recalling an old email about the incident. I showed it to Dr. Weber, who read it carefully. "This could be a key detail," she said, her expression thoughtful. She immediately began cross-referencing Rex's recent data with that old report, and her demeanor changed from puzzled to focused. "We need to look into this further," she said, sounding more determined than ever. Over the next few days, the clinic became a flurry of activity around Rex. I had expected a final, quiet goodbye, but instead we were on a quest to uncover what was really going on. The staff, who had been prepared to comfort me in my grief, now looked at Rex with a mix of curiosity and hope. Each new test brought more questions, and every new clue seemed to add another piece to an increasingly complex puzzle. Dr. Weber led the investigation, consulting with specialists across different fields. "We're seeing signs of an unusual immune response," she explained to me one evening. "It's possible Rex has a rare condition where his immune system attacks itself but also tries to repair the damage, leading to these conflicting symptoms." I didn't fully grasp the medical terms, but I could tell that she was determined to find answers. Meanwhile, Rex began to show small but noticeable changes. He was still weak, but there were moments when he seemed more alert. He would lift his head, sniff the air, and even wag his tail briefly. These were tiny signs, barely there, but to me they were monumental. "It's as if his body is fighting back," Dr. Weber said. "He's not out of the woods yet, but there's a chance." I spent hours by Rex's side, talking to him, petting him, and hoping for a miracle. It felt strange to go from preparing for his final moments to watching him show signs of life. There was still a long way to go, but I found myself daring to hope, even if it was just a little. The investigation stretched over several days, and finally Dr. Weber called me into her office. She had a file in her hands, and I could tell by her expression that she had news. "We've identified what's happening," she said, taking a deep breath. "Rex has a rare autoimmune condition that causes his body to attack itself, but it also triggers responses where his immune system tries to repair the damage. That's why we've been seeing these mixed symptoms." She went on to explain that while the condition was serious, it was manageable with the right treatment. "It's not going to be easy," she said, her tone cautious but hopeful. "Rex will need regular monitoring and medication, but I believe we can give him a good quality of life." I felt a mix of relief and disbelief. After preparing to lose him, I was now being told that there was hope, that Rex could still have more time with me. "Thank you," I whispered, my eyes welling up. It was all I could manage to say. As I left the clinic that day, Rex trotted beside me, his movements slow but steady. His eyes were brighter than they had been in weeks, and his tail wagged slightly. It wasn't much, but it was more than I had dared to hope for. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them, just as Rex had been there for me all these years. What had started as a heart-wrenching farewell had turned into an unexpected new beginning. We weren't out of the woods, but there was a path forward, and we would walk it together. For 12 years, Rex had been my loyal companion, and now it was my turn to fight for him, to give him the best chance possible. Rex's journey wasn't over. It was far from easy, but it was still going, and that was all that mattered. As we headed home, I realized that the hardest part hadn't been preparing to say goodbye, it was daring to hope that we could have a little more time. And now, with that hope reignited, I was ready to cherish every moment, every wag of his tail, for as long as we had left together. Rex's condition was a reminder that life is unpredictable, that hope can emerge even in the darkest of times. We faced setbacks, moments when I feared we were back to square one, but we kept going. Each day was a gift, and I knew that as long as Rex was by my side, we could get through anything together. And so our journey continued, not as I had expected, but in a way that made me appreciate every moment more deeply than before. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about cherishing the time we had, however long that might be. And for that, I was endlessly grateful.